Good morning, attendees joining. We'll get started in about 1 minute, just allowing everyone to join. Okay, good morning, everybody. I can still see a few more people joining, getting started. My name is James Elsmore from Island Innovation, and I'll be the Master of Ceremonies for today. Our final day of CCI-CBF week. It's been a fantastic week, lots of really great sessions. And right now we have 2 sessions in one for you. So this first session will take place over the next 2 hours, scaling up ecosystem-based adaptation in the Caribbean, and will be immediately followed by our closing session. So do stick around. You don't need to leave and rejoin. You can just stay in the same setting, stay in the same place for the closing session. And I imagine we'll have a lot more people joining us for the closing session as well. So if you have joined our previous sessions, hopefully you know the drill by now, but just a few technical points. We are live streaming to Facebook, and we're also recording all of these sessions. So do bear that in mind, that everything is being recorded. We have both a Q&A and a chat function. So across the bottom, you should see the option in the chat, and great, I can see people already coming in. Just a reminder, when you use the chat, do click the blue box. Be mindful of who you're sending the message to. And we encourage you to select all panelists and attendees, because our panelists might be very busy and might not see your message, but a lot of the other attendees attending do want to. So if you've already sent a message just to all panelists, please do select all panelists and attendees for your messages. If you have questions, there will be some opportunities at the end of this first session for a Q&A. So I do encourage you to post your questions throughout. You can click on the Q&A box and post them there. Some of our panelists may take the opportunity to write written questions, but our moderator will be sure to answer as many of those as possible. And as attendees, you also have an option to upvote your questions that you agree with. So you don't need to submit the same question twice. You can upvote questions that have been submitted. We're going to just start off with a quick poll. Let me activate that from our side. As with our other sessions, just to get to know who is joining us today, what sector do you represent? And that should be appearing on your screen now. And which region are you joining from? And I can see lots, while we're going through that, lots of messages coming in through the chat from people joining from St. Lucia, Dominica, Germany, US, Curacao. Lots of St. Lucians, always well represented. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I probably missed some as well, but lots of people joining there. I'll end the poll now and share it. So you can see from this, around half of the people joining this session represent NGOs, and around half as well from the Caribbean, and then a spread between other sectors and regions. And for those of you just joining, do remember to send your messages to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. So that's it from me. I'll see you again for the closing session in around 2 hours time, but I'm now going to hand over to our moderator. So Ali Raza Rizvi is the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Program Manager at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. And Ali will be moderating the session today. So I'll hand over to you now, Ali.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'll now introduce and request Ambassador to have the opening remarks. Her Excellency, Ambassador Ute Cohen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ali. A warm welcome to all attendees of our final day of the CCI-CBF week. Today, we will be concluding our virtual week of meetings, and I think this has been a great challenge to all, but also a great experience, the way it worked out. But this week of discussion cannot end without addressing a key topic, climate change, which can seriously impact all of our efforts to effectively conserve and sustainably use our natural resources. The Caribbean's natural capital and people are under growing threats from the effects of climate change and unsustainable development. Unregulated land clearing, pollution, overfishing, among others, causes, and increasing frequency and severity of hurricanes and storms, sea level rise, rising sea and air temperatures, ocean acidification. These are all having serious impacts on the Caribbean seas. A key approach to address these threats is to implement ecosystem-based adaptation actions, shortened EBA. EBA, as part of a broader climate change adaptation strategy, has proven to provide resilient and cost-effective means of alleviating climate change impacts by integrating the sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services with human well-being and sustainable livelihoods. I'm representing the German government here today, and in the recent days we have heard about the cry for funding. And in this context, I can say that with support from the German International Climate Initiative, our Ministry for Environment and Nature Conservation, the BMU, through our German development, the KfW, has established the CBF ecosystem-based adaptation facility. This is a $50 million sinking fund, and it is aimed to support EBA projects in targeting countries. And these countries are including Antigua and Barbuda, Cuba, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Only last December, the BMU has been topping up this EBA facility with an additional 20 million euros, and our minister was saying that she finds that nature often provides the best solutions for tackling climate change, and that she considers the EBA facility to be a flexible and demand-based funding instrument to promote ecosystem-based adaptation in the Caribbean. The instrument aims at protecting ecosystems which contribute to reducing the negative effects of climate change on coastal zones of Caribbean island states. To date, the ecosystem-based adaptation facility has already committed about $12 million in its first call for proposals in 2019. I'm very happy that 11 projects have actions in 10 Caribbean countries. Currently, the facility is conducting its second call for proposals. They have received 79 project concept notes, which are currently under evaluation. In addition, through the recent contribution to the CBF endowment from the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development through KfW, we are supporting, along with CBF resources, Hurricane Dorian recovery efforts in the Bahamas. I now have the pleasure to introduce the Bahamas Protected Area Fund, BPAF, Shanique, who will make a brief announcement related to these efforts, which are co-funded by the German government. Thank you, BPAF, for your announcement. I hand over to Shanique.
Good morning, and thank you, Ambassador König. It's a pleasure for me as a board member for the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund to attend the CCI-CBF Week 2020 and to advise that the call for proposals for project concepts related to Hurricane Dorian recovery grants is now open through August 28, 2020. The funding for this call was graciously provided by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development through the German Development Bank, KfW, and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. Germany continues to demonstrate its commitment to our region by its considerable investments in the CBF. For the Bahamas, this commitment was made very tangible following the catastrophic passing of Hurricane Dorian in September 2019. Germany advanced up to 1 million euros for assessments, restoration, water purification systems, and renewable energy initiatives in and around Abaco and Grand Bahama, the islands most affected by Hurricane Dorian. Be assured, we will use these funds well. It is my honor to publicly thank KfW, in particular Jens Mackensen, the government and people of Germany for their incredible kindness in supporting the restoration of ecosystems on these islands. BeefPath also applauds the CBF and congratulate you and your fine leadership in protecting not only the natural environment of our region, but also for ensuring hope for all of our people. Thank you, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ambassador and Sinead. It's great to see that how quickly the response was done by the government of Germany. And government of Germany has always been at the forefront of ecosystem-based adaptation also, where we will be discussing today. So thank you, Ambassador. Before going into the this session, let's just have a quick poll, James. So we would like to see, just very basic understanding. You have around 40 seconds. So it would be great to have your responses, that how familiar you are with the concept of EBA and overall. So just take a few seconds.
We'll just give about 5 more seconds to wrap up your answers, so please do submit them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great to see that we have experts over here. So it would be a wonderful session together with you all so that we can better understand what is EBA and how best we can work together to take it forward. As James said, my name is Raza Rizvi, and I'm responsible for IUCN's Global Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction portfolio. This panel is intended to promote a discussion about the strategies and tools to scale up ecosystem-based adaptation efforts in the region. In today's world, we have reached a point where working with nature is not just important, but a matter of survival. Wildfires, COVID, now current heat waves in Siberia and Alaska, looming season of new cyclones, all call for action on an emergency basis. It's no longer a matter of conservation or sustainable development for future generations. It's a matter of now or never for the current generations as well. It's critical that actions are taken holistically and not in silos. We must approach this with a big picture programmatic strategy. As you know, that ecosystem-based adaptation links people and nature to respond effectively to the challenges of climate change in an integrated manner. So working with and through EBA approaches, human climate resilience is enhanced, socioeconomic aspects are strengthened, while respecting the integrity of local ecosystem and biodiversity. EBA recognizes the importance of equity, gender, and role and importance of local and traditional knowledge. That's why, in my opinion, EBA is the embodiment of sustainable development in the context of climate change, as it targets all pillars of sustainable development: social, economic, and ecological. It was back in 2008 at the UNFCCC Poznan COP that the term EBA was coined by IUCN and its members, and in 2009 it was officially defined by the CBD as the use of biodiversity and ecosystems to respond to climate change. It's crucial to note here that under nature-based solutions, which was defined in 2016 at the Hawaii World Conservation Congress, EBA is an operational component of umbrella term NBS. So EBA is part and parcel of NBS operationalization. As such, is the nature-based solution for climate adaptation. So there is no case of NBS versus EBA or any other such issue. And as Ambassador also shared, I must again mention Government of Germany here, which has championed EBA through its International Climate Initiative, ICI. And since 2010, it has now invested more than 250 million euros on EBA specific projects. And the first major EBA project, Mountain EBA, was funded by ICI and implemented by UNEP, UNDP, and IUCN. Since then, various organizations have done tremendous work to showcase the effectiveness of this holistic approach to tackle climate change. IUCN has been working with members in Honduras and improved the livelihoods of 27,000 farmers and rural leaders living in dry corridor through the adoption of climate smart and disaster risk reduction practices. And 44% of these beneficiaries were women. Similarly, in Guatemala, working on coca value chain from production to commercialization resulted in increased coca yield from 180 kilogram per hectare to about 500 kilogram per hectare. So the key to success for EBA is to design and implement initiatives as per the defined components of EBA. That is, all elements pertaining to social, economic, and ecological aspects are targeted concurrently to enhance resilience and reduce climate risk. If the implementation process fails to target all three components, not only is the investment not maximized, but it could also lead to maladaptation and negatively impact local environment or economies in the long run. That's the very reason FIBA, a global network of EBA experts, again supported by BMU ICI, developed the EBA qualification and quality standards together with GIZ, IIED, and other FIBA partners, and also developed with IIED WCMC a methodology to appraise the effectiveness of EBA. And recently, through the platform of FIBA, GIZ, WCMC, CI worked on an M&E guidelines for EBA. Also, an ABA navigator comprising over 250 tools and methodologies is also available. At the same time, policy level scaling up, there's good uptake of EBA, as around 77% of NDCs contain at least one qualitative and quantitative target pertaining to climate adaptation through ecosystem. Similarly, various policy processes at the UNFCCC, CBD, CCD all emphasize the use of ecosystem-based approaches for climate adaptation. The challenge is to scale up field projects. And today we will have a panel discussion on how initiatives in the Caribbean region are responding to this challenge. We look forward to a robust panel, but at the same time, we encourage you to actively participate in this discourse. So please share your views and questions and we will try our level best to respond to these questions and your responses. Our panelists are Joth Singh, CBF EBA Facility Program Manager. Joth has been managing the CBF EBA facility since its launch in 2018. It's a 50 million euro grant making program for EBA project in the region. Kheel is Vice President at Grupo Foundation and has pioneered several social and environmental initiatives in the Dominican Republic. Pena is Project Officer at the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. Maria has managed several initiatives and conducted research on socioeconomic monitoring of EPA, MPAs, marine resources, governance, and climate change adaptation. Joseph Smith Abbott is Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Natural Resources of the British Virgin Islands. Joseph was also involved in National Park Trust and was director for over 18 years, and currently is responsible for the ministry's climate change adaptation initiatives. So now I'll come to our panelists to make their interventions, and then we will go into some question answer after the first intervention, and then back to our panelists and again with some question answers. So now I'll request Joth first to go ahead and make introductory remarks about the facility and his presentation. Over to you, Joth.
Thank you very much, Ali. Also allow me to thank Ambassador König for her words and the support being provided by and through the government of Germany. Thanks very much, Ambassador König. I also wanted to share with you that Ali is currently the selected chair of the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Facility Committee. And you know, he's a renowned expert in the field of ecosystem-based adaptation. And we're very happy to have him chairing our committee and sharing his expertise and wisdom as to how we implement within our Caribbean region. Ali, thanks so much for your own involvement. I think it's important to start my own short session on financing strategies to say that EBA really should be viewed as a part of a broader climate change adaptation strategy, as it is not intended to be a fix-all to build resilience to climate change. It has proven to be a resilient and cost-effective means of alleviating climate change impacts, as Ali suggested, by integrating the sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services with human well-being and sustainable livelihoods. Indeed, you know, I wanted to emphasize that point, that people are very much in the center of the EBA approach, and I think it has gained a lot of traction because of the philosophy that people must benefit. I think it's also really important that a part of the strategy to better utilize EBA approaches is to identify its place in policies, plans, and on-the-ground activities. This, of course, needs to be determined by the appropriate science. I think it's really important to have this rooted in science and to have the necessary studies, which include climate vulnerability and risk assessments conducted, so that we are operating on that platform, which is, you know, determined in a very constructed and structured way. Ali mentioned the issue of maladaptation, and we've seen several instances of that in our attempts to adapt to climate change, utilizing some of the more traditional means in terms of adapting to changes in our climate, so that we very much want to avoid going down that pathway and ensuring that science and traditional knowledge, of course, is providing the background for the work that we will do. Some of the documents that I think we really need to incorporate the ecosystem-based adaptation approach would include things like national climate change policies, national adaptation plans, which have been developed by countries to identify the way forward with regards to adaptation. The recent nationally determined contributions as well would be an important document to reflect the role of EBA. I would say that in addition, regional and sub-regional strategies developed for the Caribbean also would need to identify the role of this approach, which is ecosystem-based adaptation. I wanted to share with you a regional initiative which emphasizes the EBA approach, and that is provided by the OECS Commission. The OECS Commission released a publication in June of this year, which is titled Building Resilience with Nature and Gender in the Eastern Caribbean, a toolkit to mainstream ecosystem-based adaptation, gender equality, and social inclusion. This was funded through the French AFD under AFD's Adapt Action Facility. This toolkit is intended to support climate change practitioners and decision makers in mainstreaming ecosystem-based adaptation and gender equality and social inclusion considerations into climate change adaptation related policies, plans, and on-the-ground activities. And I would strongly recommend that you take a look at the approach which has been developed for the OECS, but certainly has application across the region. We're also very familiar with the international financing mechanism set up to support countries in building resilience to climate change. These, of course, include the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and additional GEF financing mechanisms. The GCF, Green Climate Fund, I believe, provides a good gateway for providing larger financing for scale-up of adaptation projects. The CBF may very well consider seeking to become an accredited entity to the GCF, recognizing that there is a significant pool of funds which is available through that mechanism. The total value of the GCF as of June 2020 stood at $18.9 billion US, which is a tremendous amount of funds. A lot of this, of course, has been committed and needs to be actually placed in the fund. We know that $4.4 billion of that fund is being implemented, with about $1.2 billion being dispersed. So an important mechanism for us to look to in the future as we look to scale up ecosystem-based adaptation within our region. I also wanted to mention the role of the private sector in financing EBA, and that is gaining in momentum. Public-private partnerships is a key strategy to my thinking. My colleague Kheel will provide some insight into private sector engagement in the Dominican Republic, and he's also part of this panel. And there are others like the PPP with Sandals Foundation and the government of St. Lucia on coral restoration and sustainable livelihoods. Of course, to mention that there are several multinational financing mechanisms operating within the region, including support from the government of Germany, which you have heard from so far from Minister König, the government of France to AFD, the European Union, JICA, USAID, IDB, to name a few. I would say that support from the government of Germany, and specifically through the Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety, BMU, under its International Climate Initiative, or ICI, through the German Development Bank, KfW, has been the front runner in providing support to the Caribbean in the area of ecosystem-based adaptation. And of course, we're very grateful for the support that, that the government of Germany, through KfW, is providing to the region. Ambassador König already mentioned the support which has been provided through the CBF in establishing the EBA facility. Of course, I have the tremendous pleasure in leading that facility as program manager. It's currently a $50 million sinking fund. And by that, I mean that it's a sinking fund because it has to be spent down as opposed to the endowment fund, the other instrument operating with the CBF. So we are looking, of course, to invest that $50 million and other revenue gained from investing that money to support coastal marine projects in targeted countries, qualifying for overseas development assistance within our region. Ambassador König has already identified those countries, so I won't repeat. The mechanism is intended to be a faster track mechanism. I think those of you who have tried to gain funding from some of the mechanisms which offer large amounts of funds it is very complicated and they take a long time. So we within the CBF and EBA facility is looking to have this as a faster track mechanism where within 1 year from applying to the fund, decisions would be made. The facility was really set up in 2017 and was mentioned in the second cycle for supporting projects. Ambassador König mentioned that we have committed $12 million to 11 organizations in 10 countries. We had over 100 applications. It was a tremendous request for support. The second call has been activated and equally popular in that we have up to 80 applications, receiving a total request for funding of up to $89 million US. And certainly it represents the sort of popularity and demand for support for ecosystem services. So the first set of projects has been very broad ranging in supporting projects in terms of protected areas management and rehabilitation, restoration of ecosystems. All these projects are very heavily invested in supporting people to adapt to changing conditions and also supporting sustainable livelihoods, as I mentioned. We've had projects on mangrove wetlands, coral reefs, seagrass beds, riverine systems. And I wanted to mention a project particularly on sargassum impacts and benefits, which is also being supported through the EBA facility. I also would like to mention a project which is supported by PMU on EBA. It's a 20 million euros global fund for ecosystem-based adaptation, which aims to provide support through seed capital for innovative approaches to ecosystem-based adaptation. The project is officially titled Support for the Implementation and Upscaling of Ecosystem-Based Adaptation. It's jointly implemented by IUCN and UNEP. Caribbean countries could also potentially benefit from this global fund, which runs from 2020 to 2024. The first call for proposals is tentatively targeted to go out in November of 2020, with projects being funded between 50,000 to 250,000. It's really meant to be a sort of a small grants initiative. And my colleague, Ali Rizvi, is assisting in coordinating that program, and Ali, of course, can provide more information on that. So I would like to
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ali, very much for allowing me the time to speak on these projects.
Thank you, Joth, for a detailed intervention on CBA and EBA facility in the Caribbean. And we will come back with other questions later. Okay, now I'll go to Kheel to share his experiences briefly about private sector engagement and experiences through the foundation he's part of. Over to you, Jake. Thank you.
And, good morning, everyone. And thank you to the CBF for the opportunity to participate in this meeting, and especially to the German government for its leadership on climate change and ecosystem-based adaptation. I represent a company called Grupo Puntacana. It's a tourism resort and development company in the Eastern Dominican Republic. Our company is Dominican owned and has been operating for over 50 years. We were the pioneers for the first tourism company in the Eastern Dominican Republic, and has had a long established and very deep commitment to sustainability in many ways, including the local community, the local environment, and supporting the sustainable development of the Dominican Republic, and with particular interest in the tourism industry. And I think our background is particularly unique because sustainability was really built into the earliest days of the company, from the type of construction we did using local materials. In the early 70s, one of the first actions taken by the company was to build a local school in order to attract local workers and to attract their families so that they could have a more sustainable livelihood. And then that has grown into the philosophy of the company and really been part of our DNA for the last 50 years. And our involvement in EBA really starts in the early 90s. The company formed a foundation, and the foundation's original mission was to protect and restore the local resources and contribute to the sustainable development of the country. And in the early 90s, that was really unclear what that meant. I mean, we were basically looking to help the local people and protect its local environment. The founders of the company saw that as tourism grew, there was increasing pressure on the local resources, and particularly in coastal tourism, very extreme pressure on beaches, on coral reefs, on mangrove habitats, and the different species that live in those and inhabit those habitats. And then also the local communities that existed in that region. And so the company really had this growing and evolving philosophy to try and leverage its resources as a company to try and help and improve local conditions. That has transformed over the years, and I will just show a few slides just to give a sense of what our company has been doing, particularly in EBA and on ecosystem-based adaptation. And essentially, when you think about coastal tourism, really the two, and especially in the Caribbean, you have two primary assets that you're selling, the two primary attractions. And one is the local culture and the local people. When you go to each one of these individual islands, what attracts people to the Caribbean is that local culture, the music, the dance, the traditions, the food, all of these different cultural aspects, and then also the interactions with the local culture, the way the local people are. There's a very graciousness about the Caribbean people, and that makes it very attractive for tourism. And then also, of course, one of the biggest attractions are the coastal resources, the beaches. Beaches, obviously, white sand beaches being a huge attraction for tourists coming to the Caribbean. Coral reefs and all of that, what that entails, activities that tourists can undertake on the coral reef, scuba diving, snorkeling, kite surfing, even any kind of interactions on the beaches are benefited by the presence of coral reefs. And even species that contribute to coral reefs, like these viviparous parrotfish, who actually produce much of the white sand beaches that we enjoy, and that create this tremendous benefit for the tourism industry, and really this great attraction for the tourism industry. There's also the activities for tourists to enjoy, and it's a big part of the Caribbean economy is marine-based activities, whether it's touring or underwater activities. And then local resources that contribute to the economy for food sources, for fisheries, for local fishermen. This becomes, these are incredibly important resources to this local economy. In the Caribbean, many of these resources are under extreme threat, both by local activities, development activities, and also climate change. And so the basic business that we operate in coastal tourism in the Caribbean is threatened by climate change and by environmental impacts. So if you are operating a company in any way related to tourism in the Caribbean, it should be in your interest to consider what's happening with the local resources, with the coral reefs, with beaches, erosion of beaches, now with new issues such as invasions of seaweed and other species like lionfish that had not typically been in our region. And of course, there's also a very important interaction with the local community and local fishermen. In smaller scales, they can be beneficial to local economies, but with more intensive fishing, there starts to be greater impact on reefs. And many of the Caribbean reefs suffer from extreme overfishing on reefs, not only to supply local tourism restaurants, but also to supply other parts of the economy. In the Dominican Republic, and especially in the Eastern Dominican Republic, 60% of the fish catch is parrotfish, which is a relatively low value species when it's served on a plate, but an extremely high value species for its ecological functions. And most of that catch is not even sold in the tourism destination. Most of parrotfish is sold in other parts of the Dominican Republic. So you have exploitation of a local resource that's having a big impact on the local ecosystem. So what we've done as a company is trying to determine ways that we can leverage what we do as a company in order to create value, in order to create solutions for many of these challenges, and then share our experiences in order to scale up the things that we're doing and get other destinations in the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean, both to learn from what we've done right, learn from what we've done wrong, and also expand the knowledge base and the experiences. And one example of that is in coral restoration. Coral restoration, this is just a couple of slides to show what it is, but essentially the first wave of methodologies included the creation of underwater coral nurseries, where we took limited numbers of species, in this case endangered species called the Crapa cervicornis, or staghorn coral. We took small fragments of this coral and then grew it in underwater nurseries with very simple materials. And then in ideal conditions, that material grows much quicker, and then it begins to fill out these frames, and then that material overgrows the frames, and the frames themselves can become habitat for species. But then also we can take fragments of those corals and then transplant them back onto the reef. And it's in its earliest days, and we've been doing this work now for close to 15 years. These were very labor intensive, hands-on, and all required diving and underwater labor, and it really was limited to one species. There are now new technologies and new methodologies coming out that allow us to greatly expand the types and numbers of species that we're incorporating into restoration activities, the methodologies for outplanting that material, and also the increasing the survival rates of the corals, and bringing in genetics to try and increase the resiliency of the corals and the genotypes that we're working with. But I left this slide here because what we found was that coral restoration was a great gateway, a great entry point for involving local fishermen into conservation activities, and that has expanded greatly into involving local fishermen into all types of tourism activities. Ironically, often fishermen continue to fish despite being in areas where there is lots of tourism, where there are lots of jobs and there's lots of opportunities, but there often is no connection between those local tourist economy and the fishermen, and there just isn't a connection between creating new job opportunities for fishermen. And so you have this continued pressure on local reef ecosystems by artisanal fishermen. You have unsustainable fishing practices that are having an important impact on reefs, but there's no connection between these fishermen and the local habitat. So these are 3 fishermen that were dive certified and trained to do coral restoration work with our foundation. And eventually that expanded in the creation of a new association of former fishermen and fisher families, including their families, that went beyond simply conservation work. These fishermen were then trained to be boat captains, to work in the dive industry, and more recently to work in solutions to confront sargassum seaweed. And so all of a sudden we've expanded the opportunities for fishermen to contribute to conservation activities as well as to contribute to tourism activities. And this is something the private sector is uniquely positioned to do. So this is what outplanting of restoration looks like. These are what successful transplanted corals look like. And this is an area that's been restored to a greater degree. And maybe in the next session, we'll get into sort of new methodologies, but I just wanted to show that these are local fishermen that are being trained as boat captains and certified so they can be hired not just by our company, by any company that has dive operations or boat operations, and we can incorporate these fishermen into local economies. These are fishermen doing dive certifications, and all of this is really facilitated just by very little effort by the private sector, but a conscientious effort to involve local fishermen in solving some of these really complex ecosystem challenges and involving them in solutions to climate change challenges. And so we think from the private sector, we have a unique position and a unique capacity to involve the local community, to come up with new and innovative solutions for different challenges, and then to try and scale up those challenges. So that I'll leave it there, and we can get into more detail later.
Thank you, Jake, for sharing experiences about the private sector and as well as tourism and engaging with the communities. So linked with that is the very important aspect of social engagement and creating ownership of the initiative, because that also contributes towards scaling up. So our next speaker is Maria Pena, who will discuss and share experiences about engaging communities. So over to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ali, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, although I would have preferred to have been having this conversation with you in the beautiful Bahamas. But as the situation is, that was not meant to be, but surely there'll be another time. In my chat, I hope to just touch on a handful of requirements I believe are needed for scaling up EBA efforts. But I know that we are joined by a number of practitioners, managers, policymakers, donors, NGOs, and private sector representatives who have insights about this. And it really would be good to hear from you during our discussion session, as Ali intends to make this more of an interactive show. So I think I should first start by just saying that scaling up a project or an initiative by transferring it from a local level to the national or even a regional level is a sensible thing to do, especially in times of budgetary constraints. It means investing in programs that have proved successful and building on them without having to start from scratch. But transferring successful smaller scale initiatives to other places or to a larger scale by taking differences between settings into account is challenging. Activities are often linked with the need to adapt the original projects, the programs, or the policies in line with different characteristics of users and user needs, as well as contexts. If I only get one thing to say in this session, it would be that the overall priority requirement, I think, for scaling up EBA projects is that of the application of a transdisciplinary approach to the design, development, and implementation of any EBA effort, even before we think of scaling up. A growing phenomenon globally is that effective environmental research needs to take this transdisciplinary approach into account. Transdisciplinary approaches, they are really a comprehensive, multi-perspective, problem, solution-oriented approach to a societally relevant issue that integrates scientists from a wide range of academic disciplines as well as non-academic actors. To mitigate or to halt the negative trends in environmental degradation, a transdisciplinary approach is needed to understand the structure and the processes of the social ecological systems, as well as the perspectives, the values, and the goals of different actors within the particular area of interest, and to identify ways and means of achieving common goals. EBA research, projects, initiatives require integrating approaches, methods, and knowledge across disciplines that are often based on different perceptions. EBA considers both ecosystems and socioeconomic aspects. But as Ali said, at its core, the concept refers to the mutual dependence on each other. Both natural and social science capacity is needed for conducting EBA research. Such an approach, this transdisciplinary approach, will provide reliable data to develop the nexus among social, environmental, and ecological data for use in influencing policy and informing timely decision-making, holistic management, and the development of interventions with respect to EBA. This can be replicated for uptake and for scaling up. It should, however, be noted and cautioned that this transdisciplinary approach to EBA efforts often includes, it does include facilitation skills and liaison skills, knowing how to get in among communities, very important. And these are not skills learned in the university or administrative offices, so there is a need for collaboration with NGOs. A second requirement that I think is very important is social engagement. It's necessary from the perspective of needing more and better socioeconomic data and information. It's important for community engagement and for the use and the integration of common and local knowledge. One of the main weaknesses of environmental initiatives, coastal marine management, climate change adaptation today, I think, is a lack or the limited use of socioeconomic data in planning, conservation, adapting management, and decision making. It seems really to be the lost or the neglected child in these areas. We can't contemplate using conservation, sustainable management, and restoration of ecosystems for helping people to adapt to the impacts of climate change if we don't have an understanding of human interactions with and dependence on coastal resources and ecosystems. We need also to understand the socioeconomic context of the community. Armed with such information, practitioners, managers, researchers, donors, you name it, will be better able to assess and maybe even predict the impact and the success of EBA efforts over time. If we look at stakeholder and community engagement, a key characteristic for EBA is that it is inclusive and it promotes equity. Ali said this in his introduction. Therefore, an EBA-related effort should ensure active participation of all stakeholders and incorporate gender-based considerations. We heard that both from Ali and from Joth. It's essential to involve and engage stakeholders who depend on various ecosystem goods and services and who have interests and influence in using and managing them. It's particularly important to understand the role of women as well as and marginalized groups and consider their perspectives in EBA. Including stakeholders and communities very early in the process is very important. If possible, this should be done during the design of a project or an initiative. And the idea is that the effort should be with them, by them. Partners have to be willing, however, to give some level of ownership of the project over to those persons that are affected by or can influence decisions regarding the effort. Now, what I should say is that in facilitating stakeholder engagement in EBA, one also has to pay attention to capacity building, to strengthening institutions and succession planning. Scaling up may be the ultimate next step, but in the context of people or organizations with limited capacity and weak institutions, what are we really doing and where do we go? More on that, I'm going to tell you about, I'll explain a little bit more about this in the next requirement. But I'm wondering if one of the solutions to this is really looking at networking and realizing that networking is critical. Lessons learned need to be diffused through a network. So like having a lesson exchange network, but networking needs support for sustenance and longevity. If we look at the use of common or local knowledge, as it's called, also one of the key principles of ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation is that EBA is based on the best available science and common or local knowledge and should foster knowledge generation and diffusion. The call for integrating common or local knowledge with scientific knowledge is significant. Local people can hold vast amounts of information and experience of their environment built up over a number of generations. We know that. We've all worked with these people on the ground. Building upon local knowledge and these soft approaches is potentially more cost-effective and accessible by poor and rural communities than measures based on purely external interventions or those highlighting engineering, say, infrastructure. The importance of common or local knowledge has been long recognized and emphasized, for example, in disaster risk reduction, including climate change adaptation. People have coping strategies, and you need to be able to learn from them. Methodologies for integrating local and external expertise really revolve around participatory planning techniques. And I know that there are a lot of you here on this panel and as attendees that know about this and have actually done many of these techniques. It's important to remember that common or local knowledge is intellectual property. Any knowledge products, therefore, need to be co-developed with communities, and research ethics really governs this. Engaging local communities to share that knowledge and lessons learned can assist in replicating EBA efforts, leading to upscaling. If we look at the third requirement, looking at skills for innovation, before individuals and organizations can gain influence and become players and partners in decision-making and action steps relative to EBA, they will more than likely need additional resources, knowledge, and skills. It's fundamental if you want to have people engaged, you need to devote the time to building their capacity. There are many organizations in the Caribbean, example, fisherfolk organizations, civil society organizations, and NGOs who are well-intended, but they lack the critical skills to do what we want them to. Capacity building needs to be ongoing, to be consistent, to take these efforts to the next level. When well-intentioned groups are found, what are their options for capacity building? Sure, there may be opportunities within a project for such, but what is the ongoing process in the non-formal sector? These are the fundamental factors that still prevent people from engaging and being engaged. And the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, CNARI, is one such NGO that has really tried and stayed true to civil society organizations by building capacity development into their projects consistently. The last requirement, ownership over projects. Very simply, projects need to be designed to leave legacy. This is especially since EBA results may take years to be realized. For example, coral reef and mangrove restoration. This goes beyond project timelines. And this is something that we were speaking recently at during one of our EBA facility committee meetings. How do we measure success if these projects will have success beyond the project? So engaging stakeholders and communities is ultimately about facilitating stakeholder or community-driven action. Project implementers need to be prepared to release control of actions, divest some of that to stakeholders or the community. And this should ensure longevity of adaptation success after the project has ended. Remember, with them, by them.
Thank you, Maria. Very thought-provoking points, and it's critical. And just one point to add that, if all these points which Maria you have, shared, that's critical because, if you look at pristine ecosystems in developing countries, many a time marginalized and invisible poor are living over there. So just having healthy ecosystem is not enough. It's also equitable, benefit sharing and all that. So it's really good, all these points, and we will come back to these because these are crucial. As you said, just having one aspect and not the other will lead towards something which will be maybe a good achievement, but not maximizing on the objective, which is overall. So thank you, Maria. Now we will go to the question, which is like elephant in the room. Like, whatever great demonstration projects we are doing through donor funding, they have limited time because they are donor dependent. until and unless these remarkable and amazing initiatives are taken up by the public sector investment, things will not go forward. There is very likelihood that public sector investment come in and then, it will go up. So that's critical. And for that, I will invite Joseph Smith Abbott to share experiences from the Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands. So over to you, Joseph. Thank you.
Good day, everyone, and recognizing that people are in multiple time zones, I thank the conveners for inviting us to really talk about and share with you experiences gleaned over, I would say, the better part of 20 years or more of mangrove restoration work that has been undertaken here in the BVI. Prior to Hurricane Irma, I would say that there had been a robust mangrove replanting effort in partnership with the National Parks Trust, government, Conservation and Fisheries Department, and the Rotary Club, as well as the HLS, H. Cleverty Style Community College, and many other community partners, local high schools and the sort. And a lot of the approach actually taken at that time really and truly were opportunity-based. We would collect, for instance, seedlings from mangroves that would be in reproductive stages, and really and truly fan out throughout the territory to plant and to try to reestablish mangrove ecosystems that for the most part had been lost because of a very rapid and expensive program of development, where a lot of the coastal areas really and truly sustain a considerable amount of loss of mangrove extent and cover over the many years, and therefore the need to reestablish communities in the near shore of mangroves that would supply at least ecosystem services for fisheries, recreation, and other types of uses. So over that period, we would have seen a sustained effort to replant, as I mentioned, mangroves. But if we were to really reflect over the years as to the successes and the challenges, a lot of that effort would have been undertaken mostly without an overall view of how each of the planting activities would feed into an overall national perspective on how exactly we would optimize the use of those areas and protect those areas once replanted. Most of you will obviously be very aware of the severe impacts of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, and a very, very extensive degree of damage of mangrove forests, where it's estimated that in excess of 90% of our mangroves forests were either killed because of either storm surge or wind impacts, and of course then very, very little plant material that could serve, propagules mostly, that could serve to replant the same areas that were severely impacted. So that in and of itself led to a much serious contemplation as to what exactly we can do differently about scaling up a lot of the effort, a lot of the activity that would have been undertaken over the many years. And in partnership with the Caribbean Development Bank, the Department of Disaster Management, our ministry, the Jost Van Dyke Preservation Society, we devised projects that looked specifically at assessing and quantifying the level of impact across the territory on a rapid basis. So instead of focusing specifically on one or two mangrove sites and trying to replant, not that we would have had much material, like I said, to replant, we looked really and truly using satellite imagery, using other means of direct assessment, the condition and the state of mangroves throughout the territory, with an effort to really and truly prioritize action moving forward, given the severe level of impact that would have been witnessed. In parallel and in tandem with that particular effort, we also had an emergent partnership with IUCN, where we had previously identified some common areas of work that could have been undertaken to, again, assess mangroves and the state of mangroves. And that project actually funded by Darwin Initiative, the UK Darwin Initiative, is aiming to look at, again, nationalizing the effort. In other words, how do we build on work that from other previous Darwin Initiative projects, looking specifically at, for instance, one in partnership with the Environment Systems, UK Environment Systems, the Ministry of Natural Resources, and other partners, looking at opportunity mapping, understanding after some of the rapid assessments that would have been undertaken by the Joth Van Dyke Preservation Society and others, how do we then scale up and identify those areas, again, which are critical to undertake specific restoration exercises, or those areas which actually would be undergoing some natural recovery. So it was really a matrix of choices, if you may, that needed to be made in terms of where do we actually apply those resources that would obviously be required over time to allow for the restoration of sites and the active engagement of community partners in the work required to bring those mangroves back. So again, what I would like to highlight out of all of this is from the inception of our program, it had a very strong and well-founded basis on the principle that we always engage community partners, and it was always a partnership of statutory bodies, community partners, the academic sector, and government. And insofar as what is now taking place, which I just simply like to highlight very quickly, now we are at a stage where after some level of capacity building and effort under the same Darwin Initiative projects that I've made reference to initially, we've undertaken to assess very critically all of those areas which effectively can seed or be seeded by the establishment of mangrove nurseries. There are a couple of mangrove nurseries actually that have already been established, one at the Joth Van Dyke area, and one which is actually being undertaken by the HLSCC, H. Lavity Stout Community College, and that project actually is funded by Unite BVI, where students and interns, volunteers from various walks of life are actually engaging in the collection of now propagules, which are finally being reestablished after 3 or 4 years of literally very little availability of propagules, establishing mangrove nurseries for warehousing and stockpiling seedlings and material that will ultimately, once we can undertake some deeper exploration of the sites and the socioeconomic factors that can lead to greater success, and by socioeconomic factors is if we're going to, for instance, undertake to invest in restoring a site, what is the likelihood of the long-term survival, long-term viability of those sites? Are there economic factors, economic pressures that are going to, for instance, drive the possible disturbance or destruction of the same sites that we're restoring? Really and truly understanding, again, based on the biophysical characteristics of the sites that we're selecting, are there opportunities for us to ensure that we will get optimal and maximum growth and reestablishment of ecosystems once established and restored in very significant ways. So therefore, what I would like to highlight really quickly is the fact that this is, again, a partnership of the academic sector, the educational, government, and other NGOs in really and truly identifying those areas that will serve as critical sinks for the reestablishment of mangroves. And this is well founded in both science as well as an assessment of the impacts and the long-term survivability and the effort that will be required to reestablish mangroves in the Virgin Islands. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. It's really wonderful that the government in BVI is taking up these restoration aspects, And I like the term you use, nationalization of efforts. So that's critical, because all the NGOs, whatever we do, the UN agencies and other, they come, as I said earlier, with a project-oriented approaches, which is just to demonstrate the effectiveness of an approach. And that's why it's critical, and that's the question and challenge for all of us, to demonstrate return on investment. Unless and until we will demonstrate that the investment has the benefits which are desirable and exceed the investment, only then these efforts will have the ownership from the public sector, and public investment will come in. That will go to the large scale and scaling up. So thank you, Joseph, for your thoughts. And we will now open up for questions. We already have some questions. So let's go to Jake. And there many questions coming to you regarding the examples you shared. So there one question is about the technology you are using, and also one related to that, what are potential of recovery in the degraded areas with mineral extraction technology, and the coral reef in the coastal protection and erosion reduction services, how they relate. And also related to that is that are they in marine protected areas or marine managed areas? So let's start with two, and then we will come back again.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think when we talk about coral restoration, we're still very much in its infancy, particularly when you compare coral restoration to land-based types of restoration, reforestation, afforestation that have been happening for decades, and the science and the genetics and the methodologies are much more evolved. In coral restoration, it's very much an evolving science, which when we started 15 years ago was almost not even recognized as a viable science, and much of the marine biology community was not very supportive of restoration. But as conditions have become more critical and the loss of corals globally and the threats to corals globally have become more severe, there's been much more interest in developing new technologies and new methodologies. The original techniques we worked with were very much smaller scale and limited in the numbers of species that could be incorporated. These are anchored marine underwater nurseries using very simple materials, metal frames or PVC tubes or rope structures. And much of many of those methodologies are now pretty well proven. There are projects all over the Caribbean and even in some places in the Pacific where some of the original techniques began. But more recently, beyond the asexual reproduction, which is using small fragments of corals and then reproducing those and transplanting them, there are two techniques that have come out in the last 5 or so years that have become more popular. One that we are beginning to incorporate in our work, specifically through the EBA facility, and that is called microfragmentation, and that's using land-based nurseries and different techniques to grow corals much faster, increasing the biomass and increasing the types and diversity of species we can grow. There's another type of restoration, which we are currently not undertaking, but it is happening in the Dominican Republic and in Curacao and other places in the Caribbean, called sexual reproduction. And it's essentially collecting the sexual material and crossing different coral genotypes in order to make new genotypes. And so this is all very cutting edge and new. So we're at the sort of cusp of coral restoration. And as funding has become increasing and becoming more available through initiatives such as the EBA facility, CBF, but also the EKI and the IKI, much of the funding that the German government is doing is very helpful in terms of increasing the resources available to try new techniques, to advance the techniques we have and improve the survivability and resilience of the corals we're producing.
Okay.
So that's the...
Yeah, One more question was, thank you for, and again, all those who want more information about the technical aspects of this restoration. So Jake has shared his email in the chat box. So it would be good to have more information from Jake. Jake, one important point, which was that whether what the work you are doing is in marine protected areas or marine managed areas.
Yeah. So in our property, we have 8 kilometers of ocean front. And because the property to the south of us is also another large oceanfront property, it's been somewhat of a managed area in the sense that both of our resorts are concerned about the use of the resources and have been working hard to improve that. But it has not been a formal entity with the Dominican government as a marine protected area until we signed a co-management agreement in 2018. Much of the tourism area in the Eastern Dominican Republic was within a marine protected area, but one that was not funded, it had no management plan, it had no government resources dedicated to it. So in 2018, we signed a multi-stakeholder management plan, and now we're beginning to do a lot of the legwork to create a management plan and then implement it and fund it. Through much of the work is being done by the private sector. But so marine management is obviously very crucial. Having protected areas is very crucial. And more recently now we're starting to see at least in the Dominican Republic, the recognition that there is a great role for the private sector to play in managing these marine areas and improving the resource base, using the platform of the private sector in order to improve the coastal management.
Great, thank you, Jake. We will come back to you with a couple of other questions, but now I'll go to Joth. There are a few questions about the facility. And first is about the views that, do you think that EBA help in practical way with specific synergies? There were some that interdisciplinary, intersectoral things are needed. And then another question is, will COVID help or hinder catalyze quantum steps taken towards climate change adaptation? So these two, first your views, Joth, and we will come to some more questions later.
Sure, thanks very much, Ali. And certainly on the first question with regards to integrating other approaches, I think it's critical, as we have pointed out, that ecosystem-based adaptation is growing in popularity. We have recognized it's cost-effective and has application in the context of unpredictable future, which certainly has to be integrated in some of the other strategies and techniques that we have used. A good example with regards to integration is what we call a hybrid approach within the EBA, where in not every case you will find a complete solution by using natural systems. So you would have to integrate into that approach some engineering type solutions. So we have supported projects in our first round of projects where there are components dealing with engineering type solutions, either revetment or wall, coupled with and supported by a natural system. So this is part of the strategy that we are utilizing to ensure that we have real benefits, because it's not only to promote one technique, it's really to find solutions. And very often I think those solutions come in packages where you are making sensible decisions based on the science, as I indicated, as to what would work. I think it's important to say that you don't go to an area that is eroding and plant mangroves. You have to do the studies to ensure that that application works. And in certain cases, it probably would not work. And I think that is the critical issue.
Other question was about COVID, how it's impacting the work you're doing and the facility.
Yes, and like every other place and every other sector, COVID has impacted on our work. Through our projects supported through the first call, we have had significant delays in terms of our ability to move to implementation. Indeed, we have invited our beneficiary organizations, our grantees, to make adjustments to their approach so that the COVID issues are also incorporated into the solutions that we're trying to find. And so, I think what comes out of this is the critical issue of supporting communities. There are severe economic implications from the pandemic, where we have seen that communities which tend to rely more on the traditional means of supporting themselves have been seriously disadvantaged. And so we have been promoting that strategy in terms of reinforcing the community benefits into our project from the natural systems, which have a long-term implications, I think, in terms of sustainable livelihood. So yes, we've had some impacts. We have made those adjustments, but we are trying as well to learn the lessons from the pandemic.
Okay, very quickly, Joth, before you go, when the new project selected by EBA facility will be announced?
Yes, so this is, I understand from the second call for proposals, because we've announced already from the first call, we are expecting to make decisions within the time frame, that 1 year time frame that I indicated. So this call went out, the second call went out in February. We are expecting then to have decisions made by January, February, and indeed to sign those agreements within that time frame. So, we are going through that process. We have had concept notes. We are studying those. We're looking at those. We will invite selected organizations to provide full proposals. We will evaluate those and intend to make decisions by January, February of 2020.
Okay. Thank you, Joth. I'll come to you, Maria, now. There are a couple of questions. One, about the importance of social cohesion and involving communities. So one is that how can communities be better integrated into the science of climate change and EBA implementation? So your views, and then I come to second question also.
I know that has been quite difficult, but I'm thinking that possibly getting them out there, getting them in the field, on the ground with you, demonstrating the science. I think that may be one possible way of doing it. So that can be tried. It would be interesting to hear from others as well what has been done, and maybe that can be put in the chat box as well. But I think it's just very important for them to get out, to be engaged. And I mean, this can be done through various ways as well. I mean, a lot of young people especially are very tech savvy and WhatsApp savvy. So maybe even just sending messages via these means to them to educate them about the science, about EBA. You may find that there will be more engagement through those means.
Okay, yeah. Second question was also, I think, related to that, not just communities, but also private sector, other stakeholders, while you're doing the social diffusion of the solutions and how bring them. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's quite challenging, and at times, we go with just science, data, or sometimes indigenous knowledge. Communities have been adapting for centuries. If you go to Africa, Asia, South America, they have really good solutions, but now climate change is outpacing their solutions. So, because that's such a, I always say climate change is a moving target. You prepare communities for flood management, after some time there will be drought. So this cycle of 7 to 10 years of rains and drought is now shrinking. So it's very difficult. I agree with you. I would also, so any other suggestion?
I think maybe also, and this is the intent of a project that's being funded through the EBA facility. It's Adapt, and it's being implemented by the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies. And one of their objectives is really to create a knowledge hub. And I think that may also be important. There needs to be a place for people to go to learn about what has worked well. There may be things that have not worked well as well. So it's more of a learning by doing, but also sharing what has worked, what hasn't worked. Look, it's worked here. Maybe you can try it in your country. Maybe you can adopt or adapt aspects of it. So I think that's also quite important.
Yeah, no, Thanks. So yeah, adapt and adopt, both things are important. By the way, in the chat box, Annie Bonin also shared some links with, especially one with engaging gender and community for EBA. So I will invite all of you to also have a look on those links. And now, next I'll go to Joseph. It's again $1 million question, Joseph, that how these, the example you shared, how you are changing the relevant policies around those, the initiative. But many a time, we have observed in many countries that, one policy sometimes negates the other policy. Agriculture policies are not conducive for water management or environmental management. So all the examples you do, are you also looking into a policy reformulation or review? So Joseph.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. One of the things that we identified very early in this process is that what you don't measure, you cannot answer. And in the context of policy, that means that our key instrument for public financing is a medium-term fiscal plan, which is reviewed every 3 years by law, as a matter of fact, and which actually then articulates the budget for the territory. So one of the things that we actually worked very closely with the Joint Nature Conservation Committee and others is to actually begin to really identify how the program strategies and especially the measurement framework can be modified and reformed to capture some of the values of natural capital and how these values actually are really having an impact on our economic outlook. We pay quite a lot of lip service throughout the region as to the importance of the environment to key sectors, whether they be fisheries or disaster climate resilience, building activities, of course, environmental and tourism values, but we are not spending enough time actually embedding those, the measurement of these values into our key policy documents, which in this case, if you don't pay for it, you won't. And if you don't invest in it, you won't see the benefit of it. So a lot of work actually has been undertaken to really and truly refine our measurement framework, devise very important indicators that now will become part of our medium-term fiscal plan, which will become part of the budget on an annual basis, and which we can then factor the inputs from not only government, but from all of the various other partners that I've made reference to. There's quite a lot of investment in terms of grant and research money that is actually being invested, and we need to capture that. So quite a lot of effort has been undertaken. And then this is also coupled with some legal reform on the environmental side of things in terms of our legislative framework. So to the extent to which both the legal framework and fiscal and financial tools are going to be reformed, that is some of the key initiatives that we're engaged in.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Yes, measurement of effectiveness, that's so critical. And that's why we need to do evaluation of our investments and other thing, and that will help in taking it forward. We are having many more questions, but many of those are also related to the challenges. So let's go, and again, Joseph, as you're online, so let's start with you. Keeping in mind the time, I would request all to just, try to focus just in 2 minutes, your responses on challenges. So if you can identify one major challenge, from BVI, Joseph, that all your responses and currently the work towards climate adaptation in the backdrop of all the, nature, which is also posing challenges with hurricane and other. If you can think of one challenge which you had confronted and how did you respond in 2 minutes, please.
Sure, thank you. I think that the areas that are the most important for biodiversity and for climate resilience are also coinciding, unfortunately, to some extent, with areas that are viewed as having a high economic value for tourism and other types of activities. So therefore, we can invest quite a lot of effort and time, capital, so to speak, restoring areas that in and of themselves, because of the value that we're creating, can also be seen to be under threat of the same development. So therefore, quite a lot of effort really and truly is being put in place to ensure that communities recognize the value of these sites in terms of engaging those communities in the actual restoration, building ownership over those sites, and the knowledge base to better understand how this can be sustained over time. And as I mentioned before, embedding as well tools within the policy framework that will allow for us to effectively not only measure, but track progress and how that action is actually having a significant benefit to our fiscal position as well. Thank you.
Okay, Joseph, we'll come back again with some questions out there. But now to Maria, any challenge you would like to share, and how did you respond to that in your area of work?
I think there are very many challenges, Ali, and we're always trying our best to respond to them. But building on Joseph, and I think the social engagement. So EBA stresses, and you know that, and everyone knows the need to build on local knowledge, common knowledge. Yet integrating local and external knowledge for EBA rarely occurs. And I think it's really because most people living in the Caribbean tend to have immediate life and livelihood concerns, including health, water, and food. Thus, it can be really challenging to engage them in EBA projects on the basis of long-term benefits. So I think it's really to be persistent, continue to try to engage all you can. Local champions may actually be the answer to that. We've been trying that in other projects in terms of policy champions. So there are various ways that one can do it, but I don't think that we've quite found the right mix at this time, but we keep trying. And I think it's just important to be persistent, to keep trying.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, that's so critical to be persistent. Because many a time we have seen that, people confront challenges and then push them aside. Oh yeah, there is no issue. Rather, I would share with you, and then for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to have an event to share our failures rather than successes.
That's very good. Yeah, because one can learn from failures.
Because many a time there is more learning. And one challenge I think with the conservation sector is that we don't do the postmortem of our initiatives. Health sector, other sectors, if there is any failure, civil engineering and other, they will do very good analysis of what went wrong, how, and all this. But sometimes it seems like we are very afraid of our failures. We push them aside. We don't talk about them. We maybe the donors, but now donors also ask, and it's good to see that many donors are present they're here also, that if they could also encourage, because as I said, I'm trying for the last 4 or 5 years, have not have the critical mass. I'm ready to share many of my failures in the last 25 years. So if we all, maybe at some time, we will share our failures also, because there's so much learning in that.
That's very true, Ali. That's a golden nugget there that you shared. Thank you for that.
Okay, now I'll go to Jake about, one challenge, and one of the question was also rather about that. Okay, how did you involve local communities in your technical work and other? You alluded to that, but again, or any other challenge. So very concisely in about 2 minutes, and how did you tackle that?
Sure, and also I just want to offer our support and participation in a conference of failures. We have certainly had plenty of them, and I think it would be incredibly useful to share that and invite others to do the same. I mean, we've talked about it here. We even had a name for it, the Flops Conference. So if Ali, if you put that together, we would love to participate because I think it would be incredibly useful.
Great. So at least one person there.
Yeah,
so
and
others also come on.
Also, in terms of challenges, I think when you think of coral reefs, the threats that have existed historically have only increased and become more complex. And the scale of degradation that's happening is happening in real time, fast, and very difficult to change. And our ability to confront that and scale up our solutions has been, I think, our biggest challenge. It's really, you know, we've had success with one species and one type of coral restoration activity, and we've had some success involving local communities, at least in a few sites. And I saw in the chat there was a few other places that mentioned they're working directly with fishermen and fisher families. But I think, you know, how do we scale the solutions at the same speed that the problems are occurring? You know, we have new diseases coming out in corals. We have new invasive species. We have, you know, challenges of a massive influx of seaweed, of sargassum seaweed, which has impacts on coastal ecosystems. So really, how do we garner the types of resources we need and the local support, whether it's public or private or nonprofit, and then confront those challenges? And again, I think Maria mentioned it, you know, the solutions that we see, the restoration of habitats, are on a time scale that takes 10, 15, 20 or more years, and really to have the perseverance and the ability to continue funding these activities over the long term to see solutions, you know, really implemented. I think those just incredibly hard challenges. What we've tried to do is really focus on a small area in a small place and use our company to leverage resources and maintain the consistency, and then bring in a diversity of funding sources and partners that bring different levels of expertise. So I think, you know, I think we have to really, you know, the old saying of thinking global but acting local, I think is now more true than ever. You know, we have to save coral reefs on a meter by meter scale, but we have to scale it up into kilometers of scale. And that's a huge challenge. So I think that's where the effort has to be. But, you know, you can't just say you're going to restore, you know, 50 kilometers of coral reef and really not be able to prove that you've done it on a much smaller scale.
Thank you, Jake. Very important point. You know, most of us have project-oriented approaches because we are donor dependent. So the resources are not there, and we work mostly in 3 to 4 year attention span of our work. And that comes in the way of having long-lasting and, you know, impactful, you know, interventions on ground. And I will just share one point where, you know, if we try to educate donors, they do listen, you know. So we need to be, again, you know, come together, have a critical mass, because donors do want their investment to have some impactful, you know, intervention on ground, which can be sustainable and then taken over by public and private sector investment. I was invited by ICCI on their 10-year anniversary, you know, and I was a keynote speaker there, and they asked, what do you think needs to be done? So one main point was that, you know, if we are really looking into 3 to 4 years of projects, nothing will change, because, you know, we all are expert and we know first year is spent on project mobilization, resourcing, staffing, getting NOCs and all that. Second, third year, you start implementing. Fourth year, you start wrapping up. And then we are asked, what is the exit strategy? What is the sustainability of this? We are all smart people. We can come up with wonderful progress reports and get away with it. So that's critical. If we are ready to share that, okay, you know, more time is needed, more resources are needed. We need to do coordination with everyone, because again, just healthy ecosystems are not critical. Only if we look at, you know, your or my resilience, it's also healthy, you know, overall health, roads, access, security, shelter, education, everything needs to be put together. So I think it's the governments who can break these silos, where we can have integrated approaches and come together, at least on climate change adaptation. Again, I would call out to, government of Germany through ICCI. They then, after that, they changed their, I was one of the contributing factors. There were many others also. And now there, you must have seen for the last 2 years, 8 to 12 years of investment. And from average 2.9 million, they have gone to 10 to 30 million per initiative. So things can change if we come together and work further. It also relates to somehow, Joth, to you, about investment. Rather, there's also a challenge which is coming as a question also. Do you really think there is no knowledge gap in the region? Or if there is a knowledge gap, how your facility is trying to address that? So along with this or some other, any challenge you would like to share and how you plan to respond to that? 2 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Ali, and certainly you've hit on some of the critical issues that we see as challenges. The time frame for projects is a major one. You've highlighted that. We recognize that in some of our projects, and Jake would speak to this as well, that our project cycle are 3-year project cycles. But, the time taken to see real benefits and impacts from the restoration of a reef is more sort of a 10-year time frame that you're looking at. So that is a major challenge, sort of meshing, as you identified, the project cycle that we have become used to with the time frame cycle to see real benefits. It's one of the things that we are hoping to address within the EBA facility. And you would note that we have not framed this as a project, it's really a program. So the intent really is to find other sources of funding so that we can add, supplement, assist beneficiaries in terms of continuing the work that they would have started, that they would have seeded for a 3-year period. And I think that is a critical issue that the CBF and the EBA facility would need to pursue going forward. You mentioned the issue with regards to knowledge base, and I think it's reasonable to say that there is a significant knowledge base in a wide array of areas within the Caribbean. I think ecosystem-based adaptation is not one of those, and certainly we need to build a cadre of experts. So capacity building has to be an important component of the projects that we are supporting. And indeed, we had our first EBA workshop in Dominican Republic in February of this year. And one of the recommendations coming out, very strong recommendation, is that we have to have a series of those workshops to ensure that we are building capacity and knowledge within the region on ecosystem-based adaptation. So we will do that, and we will build that into our current cycle of projects. And just wanted to mention a couple of others. I think an important one to mention is that, while there is global support for ecosystem-based adaptation through the use of natural solutions, we are recognizing, we know that governments tend to default to engineered solutions, right? It's a short-term intervention. You have a problem with erosion, well, you put in a revetment or you build a seawall. But we've seen those fail as well. But governments, because of their budget cycles, would say, okay, let's make that investment. I've seen that firsthand in Suriname, for example. That is a challenge that we need to overcome in terms of how do we impose that longer-term thinking within government structures, within public sector investment programs, to invest in nature type solutions. There are many others, Ali, that I could go on. I just wanted to comment on your failures approach. I would call it a lessons learned approach. I think another colleague made that comment, that there's nothing like failures, they're just lessons learned, right? The long and winding path to enlightenment. So I would be happy to contribute to that process as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Joth. The problem with lessons, I agree and appreciate the, because many a time we get, okay, failure, no. Lessons learned is an easy way. But, whenever we have lessons learned, it's again, those lessons are presented where we did great work. So yeah, I agree with the approach, can maybe put it there. Many a time you have to put, as they say, a a pill, a sugar-coated pill. But at the same time, many people just lick the sugar and throw the pill. So let's see how to go forward with this. Many questions are coming, and I'm also looking at the chat. Community ownership, and that I would request all of you just maybe 1 minute. That's so critical for scaling up also, because those are their land, their territory. In many areas, again, just adding a few examples from Asia and Africa, South America, we've been working, many times communities are afraid of these efforts. They say, okay, the moment these will become dense mangrove forest or areas is restored, biodiversity comes back, the forest department may come up and declare it as a protected area. The communities, as happened in the past many years, they might be pushed out. So community ownership, that's so critical. And we all say this, but many a time we just go to them to tick mark our checklist because that's a requirement. We don't go really in the ownership where they see the benefits. And one reason could be behind which many of you are saying that restoration, other things, they take time. In Africa, it takes 20 years at least to restore a grassland, savanna, and other. In mangroves, it takes really, maybe 7 to 10 years. Coral, same. So how come we, these challenges in a meaningful manner, community participation, looking together, coming, there, and then at the same time, safeguarding community's interest, not just having our own, okay, we got this area declared, we restored it, and communities were just as a means to achieve our objective. They are not part and parcel of it. Any observations on these points? So let's start with Joth, as you are here. And just 1 minute, please, on this. We have time, no limit.
Yes, so certainly, Ali, you hitting the nail on the head, as they say. These are some of the key issues that we need to address going forward. Certainly, the issue was flagged in terms of communities and engaging communities so that they can see real benefits in terms of these longer-term strategies. And that is inherent in that approach, right? The ecosystem-based adaptation approach includes communities and must benefit communities so that they can take ownership. And so we move away from these short-term solutions to the real solutions where people are taking an interest and have a vested interest in terms of contributing to sustain themselves. And that is the only way that I believe that we can move forward in terms of real solutions. So while, yes, restoring a mangrove, restoring a coral reef, grasslands take a long time, the real solutions are getting people to take ownership and to sustain it. And then the time frame becomes a lifetime, not only 5 years or 10 years, but a lifetime.
Great. Thank you, Joth. Jake, what's your views on this, or any last minute, 1 minute, please?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we start to engage parties that are not typically involved in ecosystem solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation. I think the private sector is ripe for participation, whether as a funding mechanism or as a partner in the case of tourism entities and coastal tourism, where it makes a lot of sense for hotels or resorts or developers to be more actively involved. I think we can also engage the private sector in a way by leveraging the relationships they have. Often they have a direct channel to government entities and political entities that can be very beneficial for these types of projects. I think often they have a platform for communicating these types of issues and the importance of these issues, not necessarily greenwashing them, but really communicating that, coral reefs or mangroves or seagrass beds or forests are incredibly important resources for businesses and getting other businesses and private sector entities involved. So I think we have a lot of work to do to really learn how to communicate and engage with the private sector in a better way, not simply asking for donations or reprimanding the private sector for the things it does wrong, but really trying to engage in a way and in scaling up a lot of these solutions. I think nonprofits and governments alone are just not going to get this done.
Thank you, Jake. Very important again. Joseph, and that again, there's one observation in the chat box, this continuing development, inverted commas, which is at the expense of local resources. So how to ensure that? And I think amongst the panelists, you are best placed to answer that, because that's a challenge. So maybe for you to respond in 1 minute about the challenge of this, you may, I know a huge initiative in Pakistan where around 10,000 hectares were mangrove were, restored, and initially that was also managed area. But in the last 20 years, slowly that land has been sold out to high-rise buildings because coastal areas are prime lands. So how this development versus conservation, the old question, still relevant in many islands? So Joseph, your views on it.
Yes, thank you for that. And I also took note of the same comment, and I think the way we have to deal with this is not looking at it from just the point of engaging stakeholders, but building constituencies. Because the key factor here is that if there is a political factor, a political trigger to ensure that an area is not utilized in a manner that may be detrimental to the long-term survival and of not only biodiversity but of livelihoods, that's a key thing that has to be really factored into all of these discussions. One of the key things that we've done over the many years is ensure that all of our restoration efforts are not just undertaken by practitioners such as myself or other people from the public sector, but really and truly from communities that are adjacent to those sites. And what we've observed over the many years of doing this is that when there are instances of illegal development, or when there are instances of large-scale development proposed on a site, typically that the trigger that safeguards that area is not really government, but constituents, the people who vote for the same individuals that perhaps may be driving some of these initiatives. So I think we have to look at this in a multifaceted way. I think we need to look at it in terms of not just a short-term project-driven, and this point has been made before, project-driven engagement where we bring in a particular set of actors, community members, but really and truly, how do we continue to re-engage generations of people that will safeguard and will be the eyes and ears and effectively the proponents for the protection of some of these same sites. And in addition to that, of course, we have to ensure that our legal frameworks can be effective and robust enough to really protect the sites and not allow for some of the insipid development or conversion of protected areas into other types of land uses.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, it's so critical, and at times, major missing area in many of the projects, in good examples, they do not build linkages to inform and influence local policy and legislation and work with the governments. Because many a time, NGOs and we all think, oh, we know better. That's not the case. We need to work together with the public sector, with the private sector, and that's how we can maximize on our investment. Thank you, Joseph. Last but not the least, Maria, many of these questions coming, which is your area of specialization, ownership, sustainability, long-term gains with community empowerment. So any last thoughts on it? 1 minute, any challenge you came across, we have already discussed, but any last thoughts on it, please?
I would just say that I'd like to reinforce the need for that transdisciplinary approach to any project initiative involving EBA, I think it's very important to get a number of actors together at the same table. We don't communicate the same way, and that is something that we need to work on, to understand each other, and that's why transdisciplinary approaches do need facilitation skills as well, but also engaging communities and stakeholders from the very beginning, at the very start. And this comes when you're developing, from the time you're developing a project, what do communities want to see? We're not going to them, as you said, you know, in the middle of the project just to tick the box. Yes, we involved the community. So it's from the very beginning, at the very start, always think of the engagement. Think of the people at the table, giving them a voice.
Thank you. Great to end over here. It was really wonderful having you all. Before we wrap up, let's just have the polls again. James, you already all, you know, had responded very, you know, as per, you know, your answers were really great. So let's again just have a look at again the polls. So 30 seconds, please.
We'll just give everyone another 5 seconds if they want to finish their answers.
Thank you, James. And great to see that, you know, overall thing that, you know, it's all of the above, and yes, and also improvement. Then NBS and EBA, they are targeting fine. Still 37% think differently. That's fine. Our view is as per the definition of NBS. Operational component of this umbrella term is EBA, but great to see there are different views on it. It was wonderful to have you all panelists and you all participant also, and I learned a lot while interacting with you and also looking at the chat. A lot of information, knowledge. Sorry we could not respond to all the questions, but we have those, and I believe the organizer will take them into account. And we are all available for future interaction also. But today's discussion again, you know, emphasize the need that in this world, which is increasingly becoming more and more complex with COVID, also pitching in and changing the way we need, you know, we used to work, and there is a new normal. We need to break these silos. We need to work together. We need to have transboundary and interdisciplinary approaches, because one aspect will not help in maximizing the investment, our time, and overall objectives. Most of us who are here chose this sector over some other. That was one major reason that we want to make a difference. And to make a difference, it's critical to reflect, to see, to learn, and to change the course of action. Today's world requires a major change where we need to go into an integrated approach where we can target social, economic, and ecological aspects. Only then we will be able to achieve biodiversity goals, poverty reduction, and overall development of the world and good health, because all are interrelated and interdependent. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience and bearing with us with all the questions not being answered, but it was wonderful to have you. And thank you all the panelists. Thanks again, and back to James.
Thank you all for that fascinating session. I would now like to just ask our other panelists who are joining for the closing sessions to turn on their cameras, and those of you who were joining in the previous session, if you don't mind turning yours off. But thanks again for being part of this and for sharing those fascinating insights. So we're here. It's the closing ceremonies after a very action-packed week. Lots happening, really interesting insights from everyone involved. And I can see that most of you who are here were there from the previous session. Just a very quick reminder, as this is a different session, that we won't have questions and answers anymore. Feel free to continue typing in the chat as we go through the closing ceremonies, but there won't be any more Q&As. We're still recording this session and live streaming on to Facebook. And for those of you who have just joined for the closing ceremonies, don't forget in the interpretation button in below, somewhere down here, you'll see the option to listen in either French or Spanish. So if you'd like to, do feel free to use that. We've had some excellent interpreters working with us this entire week to make sure that we have made the sessions accessible for those joining from French and Spanish speaking countries. So I think that's it in terms of logistics. We'll now go into the closing ceremonies. And so I'd like to invite Karen Panton, the Executive Director of the Bahamas Protected Area Trust, BPAF, to join and participate. Sorry, Bahamas Protected Area Fund, BPAF. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, James. Thank you to all participants who were with us this week for our virtual sessions. We have received almost 1,000 likes for the whole event, which shows that this meeting has raised the interest of a broad audience for the Caribbean's conservation agenda. Although we were hoping to have the event here in the Bahamas, the results highlight that everything has a positive side, and we are happy to see so many new contacts being established. I would like also to talk on behalf of the Caribbean Consortium of Conservation Funds, which is a group of 8 trust funds already working with the CBF. As my colleague Josephina said, this COVID situation brought us closer and has pushed us to discuss and develop ideas to implement together, to increase our impact at the regional level and learn from our experiences. We must together construct our vision of the blue economy for our region and work together to implement it with consistent funding for our strategic actions. I think I could speak for all of my colleagues from the National Trust Funds and the CBF in saying that this week of events has been a great opportunity for us to hear from and learn from experts, and to also share our work and build new potential alliances. As conservation trust funds, we are certain the connections we can create and the pooling together of all types of resources are critical to sustainable developments and livelihoods in our countries for the next decade. Blue economy, nature-based solutions, effective management, responsible tourism, ecosystem-based adaptation. We've heard about these different strategies, and it's now our common purpose and responsibility as funding agents to mobilize and direct resources to materialize these solutions in the Caribbean. Now, I would like to introduce Sophia Soni, Caribbean Policy Lead for Ocean Unite, who has brought us a special message. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and very well said. Colleagues, I am proud of the Secretariats of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund for a well-executed and successful virtual convening. Ocean Unite is tremendously honored to have worked with the organizing committee as a meeting co-organizer and sponsor. We'd like to also extend our gratitude to all the panelists, experts, and governments who've provided much food for thought, and also acknowledge the many of you who have joined from all over the world to participate in this unique interactive experience. Ocean Unite comprises a team of experts and strategists whose work focuses on catalyzing ocean regeneration by engaging and activating audiences on the importance of the ocean, as well as innovating change and accelerating investment in building ocean health and resilience. We deploy our network of over 30 global influencers from the worlds of politics, business, sport, and media to deliver crucial ocean messages to decision makers at key moments that matter. Ensure that at least 30% of the ocean is protected by 2030 and build ocean resilience. We are committed to working with the Caribbean region to advance work on ocean conservation, and I look forward to continuing our very close engagement with all of you. As many of you are aware, Ocean Unite co-founder Sir Richard Branson is an active ocean advocate and was instrumental in the launching of Phase 2 of the CCI in 2013. It is now my pleasure to introduce this special message from Sir Richard.
Well, hello everybody, and I'm absolutely delighted to speak to you today about two of my great passions, the Caribbean, my home for over 40 years, and a healthy ocean, a cause I feel very strongly about. As our planet is getting warmer and as pollution and overfishing get worse, only 2.5% of the global ocean is currently protected. And that's just not enough, and we must act now to change that. Science has shown that fully protected areas are the best tool we have to help the ocean regenerate. Healthy marine environments are key for food and livelihoods. They are also more resilient to extreme weather events such as hurricanes. Well, we need more ocean action and practical yet ambitious goals and targets. In 2013, here on Necker Island, a few very audacious Caribbean leaders agreed to a bold and historic challenge to protect up to 20% of their marine environments by 2020. And since then, we've seen incredible progress on protected areas in the Caribbean, with over 45,000 square kilometers of ocean marked for protection. And I congratulate each and every government and stakeholder who's worked so diligently to make this possible. I also recognize that there have been challenges along the way, but we cannot allow these challenges to undo our ambition to drive change for good. 2020 has been a year unlike any other. We have learned that a healthy environment is critical for human well-being, and that we must find balance with the natural world. Here in the Caribbean, there are real opportunities to invest in our future by taking care of our treasured sea. The science is clear. It is vital that we protect blue nature, our ocean. It is time for a 30 by 30 vision for the Caribbean. And today, I call on Caribbean leaders to again be bold. Let's all work together to align efforts with the growing movement of countries that strongly support protecting at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. That's a vision I can get behind, and I really hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. It is now my pleasure to introduce Eleanor Phillips, the Director of External Affairs for the Nature Conservancy's Caribbean Division and the CBF Vice Chair and Treasurer.
Great, thanks, Safia, and thanks, Sir Richard, for those really encouraging comments. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It has been a great pleasure for me to participate in this 5th CCI-CBF week and to offer closing remarks on behalf of the CCI Secretariat, the board and staff of the CBF, and the Nature Conservancy Caribbean Division. I think this week has marked an important milestone for the CCI, the CBF, the Caribbean Division of the Nature Conservancy, and for all of us dedicated to conservation in the Caribbean region. We have reached 2020 with extremely important results, as you saw during the virtual sessions this week. As we close this week of meetings today, I want to touch on a few of these important results. 11 governments voluntarily took on the 20 by 20 goal, with 5 of them having achieved or surpassed the 20% target. These are the Dominican Republic, with approximately 75% of its nearshore marine environment under protection, followed by St. Christopher and Nevis with 50%, the US Virgin Islands with 44%, Puerto Rico with 27%, and Haiti with 23%. I encourage you to visit the CCI website and to view the story map for additional details on country progress towards this goal. CCI countries have now have under protection or management more than 47,000 square kilometers of their nearshore marine environment, which is 61% of the way towards our 20 by 20 goal. Not bad. The Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture, which comprises a family of national conservation trust funds and the regional CBF, is at the center of the CCI Sustainable Finance Goal, or goal number 2. The architecture has evolved to increasingly support countries to achieve their targets. Significant success has been achieved under goal number 2. To date, 6 national conservation trust funds have signed partnership agreements with the CBF, and 4 more partnership agreements are expected to be signed very soon. With these 10 agreements, the CBF will be disbursing to partner national conservation funds about $2.5 million on a yearly basis, fulfilling its role as a regional umbrella fund and supporting the architecture into the future. Earlier today, we heard more about the CBF ecosystem-based adaptation facility, and we expect to see positive results from the projects being funded by the facility. In the next few years, $50 million will be allocated to ecosystem-based adaptation, strengthening the resilience of our communities, our ecosystems, and our economies. The CBF and partners will now strive to make the EBA facility a permanent financial mechanism for the Caribbean region. We still have a long way to go, and the financial needs to tackle biodiversity loss and climate change effects in the Caribbean are far from being covered. Scaling up resource mobilization by CBF and National Conservation Trust funds will be crucial. The national funds, the CBF, and a growing number of partners are already working together to establish financial mechanisms that will increase the resources so that we can close this financial gap. I have no doubt that the CCI, its goals, the regional finance architecture, and the partnerships forged among governments, international cooperation agencies, NGOs, and the private sector have transformed marine conservation finance landscape in our region. We are committed to continuing this effort of working towards a resilient Caribbean where nature and people can thrive. I look forward to seeing everyone at the 6th CCI-CBF week, hopefully in person and hopefully in the Bahamas in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words, Eleanor and Sophia, and again to Sir Richard for the video that he has recorded and all of his support for this week and the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. I would now like to introduce the Caribbean Challenge Initiative co-chair, Her Excellency Ambassador Ute König from the German Embassy in Trinidad and Tobago for closing remarks.
Thank you, James. Start by thanking all the participants who made this week truly a remarkable experience. We have all learned a lot virtually this week, and we've gained new insights. I can tell you, we even got insights into the booking shelves of the participants, into their back rooms, and you can see me in my office. Before closing, I would now like to give the floor to the Secretary of the CCI to provide a brief summary of this week. I know this is a hard work for John Calixte, and especially to follow after the inspiring speech of Richard Branson, but that's the way we decided beforehand, to give a small wrap-up before I do the official vote of closing. John Calixte, it's up to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all, and good afternoon, Ambassador, and thank you for the introduction. I was entrusted to provide a brief summary of the topics and conclusions we have heard in this CCI-CBF week of activities. As you can imagine, this exercise has been a bit arduous, not by the volume of the presentations, but by the richness and the information and innovative solutions presented to the issues facing our countries. The week began with a discussion on the new global biodiversity framework. The panelists highlighted that if we follow the action targets identified for the next decade, we can reach 2030, starting to recover and arrive at 2050 with a consolidated ecosystem restoration process in place, where hopefully the objective of living in harmony with nature is achieved. The conclusion is that much higher levels of investment is needed for nature from all sectors, both public and private. Besides financial resources, we heard that the leadership and good governance are essential for the new paradigm shift for economic development through nature-based solutions. While individual leadership is required at every level, it is identified that countries need ambitious, science-driven action and collaborative platforms, such as the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, to push for concerted global action. The discussions underscore that in the Caribbean, nature needs to be at the epicenter of the COVID-19 economic recovery, not only because the most important sectors depend on natural resources, but as well in building the island's resilience needed to withstand the effects of climate change. We have heard articulated during the week innovative ideas and actions to support the economic recovery of our region. For example, promoting responsible tourism within the region, supporting each other's economies. Sustainable energy for investments into renewable energy technologies to improve energy efficiency and move to a cleaner transportation system. Supporting conservation projects that build food and nutrition security at the community level. Advocating for public policies that encourage all sectors to incorporate the green and blue economies into national development. These are some of these solutions discussed and which will be the focus of several of the actors who have participated in this week of meetings. Caribbean small island development states are perfect for becoming models of best practices. They can be petri dishes to develop and test innovative approaches and show results that guide other countries. Coastal, marine, and terrestrial protected areas and the effective management are essential for the future development of the Caribbean region economies. The balance between protecting ecosystems, improving life conditions, and the well-being of the Caribbean people is a key element in the protected areas agenda. The work of the Conservation Trust Funds, highlighted by Eleanor, is central to achieving conservation targets and supporting the nature-based economic recovery. With the potential to attract international cooperation support, the trust funds need to quickly move to scale up their resource base and the impact they can make in Caribbean ecosystems. As we heard today, ecosystems-based adaptation in the Caribbean is critical for the next decade. EBA projects must be scaled up to build the climate-resilient communities, ecosystems, and economies that we need. We have to protect to sustainably use the resources that our ecosystems provide. In this regard, we must also restore our ecosystems in a manner that they keep on providing the key ecosystem services, including food to our people. Our mangroves, our coral reefs, our biodiversity are our assets in the fight against climate change. I trust that you have all been elucidated by the information-filled presentations over the last 4 days from all our panelists. It is my hope that you have fully enjoyed the discussions as much as I have done during this week. It is my pleasure to conclude the virtual week of activities with a summary of the clear messages presented on what is the way forward in the next decade, eloquently articulated by our panelists. I would like to conclude by indicating that harnessing the power of nature-based solutions that have been articulated all week to protect biodiversity, confront the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic will be fundamental to the recovery of our economies and the world economy generally. So this is my attempt at summarizing all of the various discussions that took place during the week, and I trust that I did a very good job of trying to put everything together. So thank you, and back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, John. You did a very good job indeed. I would like to thank all the organizers and supporters of this week's meeting, the Secretariat of the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, CCI, and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, CBF, the Nature Conservancy, TNC, the Bahamas Protected Area Funds, BPAF, Ocean Unite, Island Innovation, Metzler-Payden, the German Ministries for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the Ministry for Environment and Nature Conservation, and of course the German Development Bank, KfW. What we have seen today was incredible, and nobody sees the huge work that was behind it. It took a big, big team that worked hard in the last month to put this week of meetings together. Special thanks to Yabanex Batista, Asha Cowell, Karen McDonald-Gale, and Camila Montero from the CBF, to John Calixt and Caroline Trubetskoy from the CCI, to Eleanor Phillips and Chenique Albury from TNC, to Karen Panton from BPEF, to our MC James Elsmore and Taylor Mills, Alexandra Lemus from Island Innovation, to Safia Sawhney from Ocean Unite, and to 3 people who were working arduously in the background to provide us with interpretation. These are Maria, Alexandra, and Alfredo from WIF Eventos in the Dominican Republic. I hope that this has made following the conferences in our Caribbean region, which is not only English speaking, easier for all of you. To have made this virtual event possible in the year 2020, that will go down in the history as the year the pandemic struck, was a real challenge. And I think in looking back, we can see this was a lessons learned. This was not a conference of failures. This was a huge success story. We came together this year to celebrate, and congratulations goes to all the countries for their incredible conservation efforts, which were highlighted this week. We definitely have to celebrate that. CCI countries have now under protection or management over 47,000 square kilometers in their nearshore environment. The Caribbean has shown its leadership, and this is an amazing starting point to also lead in accomplishing the 2030 targets. And as we were asked by Sir Richard Branson, we have to be bold in the future. I'm also happy to finish this week with a clear view that on how the Caribbean sustainable finance architecture is becoming more and more relevant to support the region's countries to achieve the future international targets. The cooperation of governments, the conservation trust funds, the NGOs, the international cooperation community, and the private sector, we all have a role to play in the economic recovery of the Caribbean region. And nature needs to be a central piece in this process. The situation this year is not easy, but in a year of multiple threats where we have the pandemic, but also the concurrent topic of climate change, of biodiversity, and now an economic and health crisis, it's clear that we all have to work together to tackle this. And if I can take one lesson I learned in the last month during the COVID crisis was that science and data matter when actions are taken. And I think this is a lesson that's also valid for the biodiversity, for the climate change discussions we are having ahead. I want to thank all the participants for sharing these ideas. I heard a cry for more finance, for capacity building, for joining and sharing ideas that worked in the Caribbean. And I think that cooperation, working together to shape our future for the well-being of all, that is really the way ahead. One thing I took as very interesting, because I'm representing the government as a donor, and of course I was very happy that many participants praised the engagement of my government. That's probably much more credible than when the government representative does it. But what I also learned that from a study released by the World Economic Forum this week, nature has to be considered as a gain for the economy, and that for all the investments we are doing, be it the donors or also the private sector, there are models that say there is a 5-to-1 return investment. This was really a new golden nugget I took with me this week. I'm sure that this week has planted much more seeds for the collaborative work required for the future. And I hope that in the next year, we will be able to meet in person again, even though I have to say that the virtual reality has made it possible sometimes for more participants to join in, especially young persons who are the future and who are also the greatest advocate if we look on the climate change discussions in this. I hereby declare the closing of the 5th CCI-CBF week and look forward to continuing the work with all of you to see the Caribbean nature and people thrive. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those closing words, and for John Calixte for your words also from the CCI. This has been such a fantastic week. I think having the opportunity to take this online has maybe changed the event beyond recognition to what it would have looked like physically in the Bahamas. But as the ambassador just said, I think the opportunity to involve people, and I can tell you that we've had 937 people sign up during the week. The average attendance has been between 150 and 200 per session. And I know that many, many people will be watching the recordings online that will obviously be uploaded to YouTube and available for everyone who, if you missed a session or would like to share them with anyone. We'll also be continuing the conversation in the LinkedIn group, which is linked in all of the emails. And so do check that out. Feel free to post any of your own thoughts and comments, and all of the slideshows will be available and sent out to you in our final wrap-up email and on the website as well. And I do just want to say, from my point of view from Island Innovation, it's been an absolute honor to work on this event, have the privilege of being the Master of Ceremonies for the week. And Yaba has given me the opportunity to share with you our own event that will be happening in September, the Virtual Island Summit. We have really taken this idea of going virtual to be an opportunity. We all know how expensive it is to travel around the Caribbean and how difficult it can be to have opportunities to interact with islands that maybe are facing similar challenges, such as the Pacific Islands. So for those of you interested, do check out the Virtual Island Summit, www.virtualislandsummit.com, and join us for some more sessions. And with that, we will let you go. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.